Seminars and special training sessions are a great way to get started the first time you decide to come to train in Japan. But how representative is this form of training in comparison to what the kind of training you would get in a Japanese dojo? Hello, everyone. My name is Mark, and today we are doing episode 3 of the Training in Japan series. We will be discussing training seminars, special training sessions, what are the plus and minuses of each form of training, and how do those form of training differ from training in a Japanese dojo. So let's get started. The majority of foreigners nowadays get to do their first steps in a Japanese training environment through the seminar that normally occurs every year in August. It's a seminar that's held in Katsura, Chiba Prefecture. There is a Nippon Budokan training center over there, right next to Budo University. It's a great location. First, because you're right next to the sea, so just the nature is beautiful. It's great. The facilities themselves are absolutely amazing. You have a number of dojos and classrooms. You have a cafeteria. You have lodging. You even have some space outside for some barbecues if you want. So it's a really good location for doing your for doing training overall. There's a lot of various groups from all across Japan that come and basically use the center for their own gashuku, or basically a training camp or training seminar. And so, we use it basically for the same kind of purpose. It's a great way to get started in training in Japan for a number of reasons. Number one, the onboarding is much easier than just trying to go to a Japanese dojo. There's more preparations done by the organization ahead of time for accommodating foreigners. So, translators like myself we make sure to participate. Nowadays, you have people like Usuyama Sensei, who is also quite fluent in English, who does some of the translation. But overall, you basically, just get an environment where, there's a little less of a language barrier. You get a ton of training. This is probably the one thing that I personally enjoy the most. Being able to train 7 hour plus a day, in three separate sessions is, it's good. You get to drill a lot. And so that's a good thing. And you also get some extra time at night if you want to use the dojo, because, most people are resting and the dojo is still made available to any practitioner who wishes to do free practice, whether it is with other partners or personal training. So you can easily do 8 to 10 hours a day, depending on how your body condition is. It's not necessarily. It's still relatively demanding, so chances are that the regimen you follow at the beginning of the week might actually differ at the end a little bit, because you do get tired. But it's great. It's a great environment for training. It's also a great way to network with other international practitioners. So, especially if you live, say, in Europe, there's a lot of other countries where you're going to find Daito-ryu groups, and to be able to kind of convene at one time and place to be able to potentially discuss, inviting instructors from Japan or the headmaster to do a seminar and that kind of things. It's rather convenient. It's not the purpose of gathering everyone together, but while everybody's there, why not have those discussions? And those discussions do tend to happen. You also get to train with people outside of your group, foreigners and Japanese alike. This is always good to get a little bit of testing. Make sure that if to kind of like self-evaluate your own abilities and level. However, you will probably notice that relatively speaking, there's fewer Japanese people. And this is for two reasons. Number one, international seminars are international seminars. People traveling from abroad, and people from abroad that wish to practice are numerous. So there's a lot of them that travel to Japan. Just, if you take it in terms of population ratio, it's not surprising that you get a lot of foreigners to begin with. But there's also the fact that the gashiku tends to the special training, the seminar tends to happen a week before Obon, which is basically a week where of celebration of your ancestors and those who have passed away. Some people call it Japanese Halloween. I don't know why, because it has nothing to do with trick-or-treating. But basically, a lot of companies are going to be closed for that week anyway. Most people they go back to their families, or if they're the head of the family, their children are going to come back to visit. So to basically take that week off and yet another week off to go to the seminar can be quite demanding. The week before Obon also is always quite busy at work, because people are kind of trying to cover all the work that otherwise is not going to get done the following week. So for a lot of Japanese people, it's hard to basically take some time off. And that's why you're going to see a lot of students. You're going to see some Japanese people that are going to be joining kind of midway. They're going to make special arrangements. Normally, you're supposed to stay for the whole duration of the seminar. But, for some Japanese people, it's just too hard, and they submit a request to be able to join midway. It just basically comes out to the same result. There's fewer Japanese people that participate, and therefore there's fewer Japanese people to practice with. And not knowing who you'll practice with is great, but at the same time, different people have different level of understanding, and sometimes you will be paired with people that are, from your perspective, stubbornly trying to do it a certain way, and you'll be tempted to try to get them to do it the way you think is the right way. You shouldn't do that. There's a reason why there's instructors around you. Let them basically give the guidance. But at the same time, it does mean that if you're trying to practice certain things specifically, you might not be allowed to do so in all conditions. So you might have to actually try to find a person you know a little bit more to pair up with. So it's a little bit of a disadvantage. Personally, I consider this as a plus. It's always interesting to kind of try to see how people have developed their own understanding of the practice within the branch dojo or study group they practice under. It's always enriching in my point of view. Now, if you do not come to a seminar, or even if you do, you might actually eventually get the chance through perhaps your branch chief to participate in special trainings. So special trainings are essentially private lessons that are organized with a number of participants. Sometimes it can be as few as 2. It can be as big as 10 to 20, I think, is probably the biggest number I've seen. But generally, the number of people that participate is relatively small. And the practice is generally going to be focused on certain aspects. So either really covering the basics really well, or covering a certain portion of the curriculum in particular, and so on and so forth. Or perhaps it's going to be a lot of time spent sitting in Seiza, receiving instruction. There's different formats to special training. It's great because, in the case of a seminar, the more people you have, the less direct instruction you're going to get. So even if you're going to get the chance to drill things a lot, it's not going to be an environment where you're necessarily going to be able to ask a lot of questions directly to instructors and the headmaster, for instance, right? So it limits a little bit the amount of teaching, instruction, and correction that you might be able to receive. And in the case of special trainings, because there's generally fewer people, you get a little bit more direct instruction, which is very good. That said, you kind of end up at the opposite end when it comes down to drilling, is that you just don't get to drill as much, right? You're going to repeat a few things, perhaps repeatedly, but a lot of it is going to be more about transmission than it's going to be about, practice, right? You'll also want, and if you are the person trying to contact the headmaster or instructor that you've been put in touch with, and if you have a special training session, you're the organizer, you want to make sure that every participants you bring with you vouch for. I've seen some cases where people brought along people they probably should have thought twice before bringing along, and you can trust me in when I say that the person who got their finger slapped is not the person who did something wrong. It was the organizer, right? When you bring people to a special training session, just like as a branch chief, if you bring people to a seminar and they start to misbehave, they're impolite and whatnot. Sure, that person's going to get told, but you'll get a stern admonishment as well, for sure. And in the case of special training, you're taking basically off time from someone to be able to do that. So if you bring somebody who's misbehaved, you're going to make somebody very angry, most likely. Now, both are great at training environments, but they're not really representative of how you would train in a Japanese dojo. On one hand, you're going to do a lot of drilling. On the other hand, you're going to get a lot of direct instruction. Japanese dojo tend to be both at the same time. And not only that, but they tend to be something you do repeatedly. So if you go to the seminar, you're going to be doing a certain training format, which may or may not be similar to what you're doing at home for basically a week, right? But in a dojo environment, you're going to do this with a lower intensity, but over a longer period of time. And, things are going to have more time to sink in. And this is very important both for, physical development, where, your body needs some time to go through the cycle to basically practice, recuperate, and essentially develop the muscle memory that's necessary to the practice. But you also need the exposure to the culture. And this is something that tends to miss from seminar and special training sessions. There are certain exceptions to that. A good one would be the special training that happened at the Fudoji Temple in Gunma Prefecture. And unfortunately, we don't go anymore because the head priest passed away a few years ago, and the location is no longer available to us. In this particular case, it was a special. It was a gashiku basically, and we would go train there. And due to the environment and the condition, we got a lot of direct teaching. We learned a lot about the culture, and that was very interesting, right? But it's not something that you kind of keep on repeating. It is still kind of a special highlight / event as part of your training history. It isn't part of your training like day to day. So you'll learn some things, but you're not necessarily going to absorb them to the same level as you would, in a Japanese dojo, staying there for a month, 2 months, or longer, right? So while you have a good experience and you're going to learn a lot through seminars and through special training session, it's still going to be different. You have to keep that in mind. If you are part of a group that does come yearly normally for the Gashiku in August, you might actually be part of a group that travels perhaps a week prior to the seminar and spends essentially 2 to 3 weeks in Japan, with at least 1 week being in a Japanese dojo, generally the headquarter dojo. So nowadays that would be in Ryogoku, and you go and train there, right? And you'll see right away when you go in the dojo that the tempo, the air is different. The environment is very different, and things are going to be practiced with a different spirit in mind. You're probably not going to be able to really, explain what it is initially, but the more you practice, the more you're going to pick up on things, and you're going to start to understand, oh, okay, that starts to make more sense. And that, and that's what I'm talking about here, basically, when I'm trying to highlight differences between training in a seminar and training in a Japanese dojo. So does it mean you shouldn't go to the seminar and skip straight to a dojo environment? No, you still want to go to the seminar. However, keep in mind that if you want to have a more accurate experience of Japanese training, you'll need to go and spend some time in a Japanese dojo. If it's 2 to 3 weeks, that's a start. Ideally, you want to be able to come in like blocks of a month if you can afford it. So to be able to kind of really soak in all the tidbits of information that tends to just be flying around the dojo over time. In the next episode, we'll be discussing a little bit more dojo training specifically. What a dojo life cycle looks like on a per training session basis, on a monthly basis, on a yearly basis. What are the kind of activities you might end up engaging in, and how it will shape your training, and how you should basically behave as someone coming from abroad wishing to train in a Japanese dojo. As always, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to put them down in the comments. Thank you for your time, and until next time.